Hello and welcome to the first of a two-part lecture on the inquiry booklet for Year 9 History Inquiry. Welcome everybody. So I'm going to take you through step by step this process. It is a bit of a process, and so it's really important to understand it. If at any point you need to pause the lecture and go back over anything, please feel free to do so. The best way to listen to this lecture is to have a copy of the Year 9 Historical Inquiry booklet open in front of you, and your teacher will show you where that is in your OneNote. So let's actually get started. Inquiry process is a really important part of history. And what you're looking at here is basically the booklet that takes you through that process. So let's have a quick look at the task. Okay, so we're looking at the making of the modern world. It's inquiry. It's worth 30 marks. And we've got to tick a few boxes for that. So we must have an inquiry question, and you can research a topic of your choice by completing the inquiry booklet in full. And that's bolded because there are marks attached to every aspect of this booklet. So you must complete it in full to gain the marks that you need. You must find 5 sources that provide evidence to support your hypothesis. And a hypothesis for inquiry is an answer or something that supports your overall inquiry question. With your sources, your 5 that you'll be finding for that, you need to make sure you have a good mixture of primary sources, so sources of the time, produced at the time of the event, and also secondary material, which might be historians that have looked at something from the benefit of hindsight. So they're looking maybe today back at an event and making an evaluation. Your textbook is a good example, but also newspaper articles that might look back further, editorials, journals. There's quite a lot of things out there that you will find. It must reflect the area of your study, so please make it relevant to the topic you choose. You must look at providing different perspectives, so different point of views. So that might be, for instance, the point of view of someone that was there. So for World War I, we might look at a soldier. For the Industrial Revolution, it might be a diary left behind by someone that owned a factory at the time. And also images as well. Also great sources too. You don't want to fill your whole inquiry with images, but a couple will often work, and they could be things like photos, political cartoons, or any paintings of the time as well. So you must also correctly reference your research in a bibliography, and it must be APA format. The best thing to do is to use SiteMaker software that is supported by the library. So let's move on to the next element. This is the marking key. So the marking key is always a good guide, and we'll scroll through that because my screen doesn't fit it all in. And, it's broken down into the elements of the task that will have a table to match them. So first things first is the focus questions. And that really is looking at what sort of questions are we looking at here? Excuse me for a minute, I'm just changing my font. Okay, so questions are worth 5 marks, and the reason why is because your questions are going to guide your research. So in essence, you're answering the questions. So instead of normally organising your notes around a heading or around a source, you are organising your notes and your findings around the questions. So developing the sets of questions are very important, and really showing what you want to aim for is to get a good set of questions that cover your topic well, so that you can cover it well, as they will direct your research, and that's worth 5 marks. Then you can get 5 marks for locating and organising your sources. So we really want to look at sources that show a variety of perspectives. I'm just going to circle that there. That's really important. Okay, that's one of the key elements. And perspective is, as I said before, point of view. So let's say, for instance, that you select a political cartoon. That is going to have a very particular point of view for that time. What is the cartoonist saying about the event? How are they portraying the characters? That will help with perspective. Is this perspective critical of what's going on? Is it coming from a point of view that's wanting to inform people, that's an educational point of view? Is it a government perspective? Is it a perspective from someone who has an economic interest in the event? And this will vary. Just make sure, if you're not too sure with that one, check with your teacher. What point perspective is this? What point of view is this coming from? That's really what you want to have a look there. Now, selecting a range of relevant sources, definitely we don't want to select ones that aren't really kind of relevant to your questions and to your hypothesis. Otherwise, it's sort of, goes a bit off track. And you want to make sure that it's accurate as well. And accuracy is often tricky, especially in this, these days, I should say, of the internet. There's a lot of things around there that are actually quite dodgy. We need to be careful of. So, for instance, we always say Wikipedia can be edited. Now, Wikipedia might have some really good references down the bottom that you can use, but you might want to stay away from that. The best starting point is you going to the library research page, going to the Year 9 Pathfinder and actually starting there from the web links provided for you. Now, there's quite a lot of marks in here, 8 of them, attached to basically source analysis. So what you're looking at is you want to look at what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses, and you need to use examples from the sources to illustrate that. You need to include a discussion of reliability. So we might look at concepts such as bias. We might look at what we call omissions. So what is the source not telling us? We might want to have a look at the purpose of the source. So if you've got a propaganda piece that is used to persuade people to do something, that might not be as reliable as a more balanced source that gives us all of the sides of the story, so to speak. And you need to sort of have a look at reasons for each. So why is a source strong for my research? What is it telling me? How is it helping? But also, what is it not telling me? How could it be a little bit weak, and can I really trust it? So that's really what we're having a look for in that one. Now, the bottom 2 bands, so looking here, synthesizing information. Now, that's a really interesting term, that one. So it's about bringing together your information, and it's how you're organizing it that's the crux here. And this is the hardest thing to get your mind around, I do find, in this one. So is it organized around your focus questions? So that might mean your focus question could be, what was the impact of World War I? And your answer might have, or your notes around that might come from 2 or 3 sources. You'll synthesize, which means combine in your own words, the ideas from those notes, and you'll pop them next to the question. Not actually going, hey, I've got 5 sources, I'm going to have a set of notes, heading, dot point, organized around the sources. So the key point here is that you're organizing your notes around focus questions, and that can be a bit tricky. So please, again, see your teacher to ask further questions. Just make sure as you're going through the process that you're on the right track. And then, of course, the next part of that, you want it to answer the focus question. So no point having questions that we can't answer. So, you can go back once you've generated the questions, you can go back once you've done your research, and you can sort of play with those a little bit. But you've got to make sure that your evidence is, it answers the questions. We don't want to have the whole, let's have a lot of research, because if I do a lot, that's going to get me the good mark. We want to look for the actual information that's going to answer your questions. So please make sure that your research is specific to the questions that you're asking of it, and that that the evidence you collect is specific and relevant. not, again, throwing a lot of content at it, which seems to be sometimes one of the things that students are a bit confused about. So please make sure that it's relevant. Volume does not always mean quality, and we don't want to trawl through heaps of notes. On the opposite side of that, we want to make sure that you do have good evidence for your research questions, okay? Because if we don't have enough detail and enough, information, then that's the opposite side. We're not really getting a good idea of your research and whether you've been able to answer those questions. Okay, now there's 3 marks attached to a bibliography. The best way to get those 3 marks is just to use SiteMaker. There is a template you can use if you want to construct your own APA, but you need to make sure that you're using that and that you're using reliable websites. Again, we don't want to see dodgy Google images and you've gone to some weird photo archive that's trying to sell you those prints. That's what we don't want to see. We want to see some good websites, and they might be things like Alpha History. They might be things like the government websites for World War One, the learning, the educational websites as well. Again, Pathfinder, go onto it and start from there because they'll always be trusted. So that's just the marking key out of the way. Make sure you're familiar with that. Okay, now the next thing here is choosing an inquiry question. Okay, so these are some examples, and these are ones we've given for you. Happy for you to choose them. And you'll notice that there's things like explaining the connection, what are the significance. These are all impacts. What was the impact? These are all great questions to have a look at, because history is asking you to look at short-term cause and effect and long-term cause and effect, and even to think about what's still going on today. So questions such as these will help you answer that. They need to be open questions. They need to consider the aspects. So there's some you can either use these ones, or you can actually generate your own inquiry question, but you must check that with your teacher first. So I'll leave you to look through those ones there. Okay, so again, some possible topics of study include. So you can also have a look at these topics, and if you have another one that's within your course outline, please come and see us. Definitely the Industrial Revolution, such a key event, is really set up very well for this process. So we'd absolutely sort of recommend that you would look at something from the Industrial Revolution. So what you've really got to do, once you've got or chosen your inquiry question, you've got to actually write a hypothesis, and sometimes we call it a proposition, and it really is in a response to the inquiry question. Okay, now, so if your inquiry question was, what was the significance of the Industrial Revolution? Your hypothesis might be, the Industrial Revolution was significant in developing advances in technology, shipping, science, agriculture, and construction. So that almost forms then your focus for your research. You might not want to use that many. You might just want to look at technology. You might just look at agriculture. This is just an example, and the best thing to do is to use the keywords from the question. So if I go back to my inquiry question and I go keywords, I've used Industrial Revolution. In my hypothesis, I've also used significance. Okay, and I've added a few things in there. You can change that as your research progresses. It often will change, but you must have one to begin with just to really guide your research. Don't leave that blank and go back to it. Again, you can change it, but you don't want to leave that blank and go back to that. Okay, this is the end of the first lecture. There is another part because I only have 15 minutes per lecture. So, please go on to the next link to continue on through the booklet. Thanks for listening.